Bueno, pues les damos las más cordiales bienvenidas a esta presentación que para nosotros es realmente un gran honor. El moderador Enrique Kay está teniendo algunos problemas para conectarse en este momento a internet, pero en algún momento se nos va a unir. Él es el moderador de esta reunión y por esto tuve que entrar de manera emergente. Se encuentran ya aquí nuestros tres ponentes. Mauricio Ríos-García, que se encuentra en Cochabamba. Hola, Mauricio.
¿Cómo estás, estimado Víctor? Encantado de estar con ustedes.
Se encuentra Edwar Escalante, que se encuentra en Perú en este momento. Hola, Edward.
Hola, Víctor, ¿qué tal? Un placer estar aquí.
Y claro, se encuentra el doctor Walter Block con nosotros, un gran honor. Hello, Dr. Block. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. I'm delighted to be with you. But I have to announce something, that I'm charging you a fee. Not only you three guys, but all the people who are listening. And the fee is you have to promise that if you're thinking of going to a university, you think of applying to Loyola University and studying with me. Mauricio was kind enough to say he was once thinking about it. So that's my fee. You have to think about coming to Loyola if you're interested in studying at a university.
Thanks, Dr. Block. Y bueno, pues para no retrasar más esta presentación y quitarle tiempo al doctor Block ni a nuestros invitados, bueno, pues comenzaremos con la exposición de Mauricio Ríos-García. Él es economista, él es un destacado consultor y asesor en temas de inversión. Hace unos días lo tuvimos en otro evento, tenerlo una semana en dos eventos distintos, bueno, pues es realmente un gran honor. Muchas gracias, Mauricio. Me parece que tu intervención en ese evento le dio mucha calidad y centró el tema del Bitcoin en El Salvador, donde debe de darse la pelea, que es en el tema de la libertad y la intervención del gobierno. Bueno, dicho esto, Mauricio, por favor, comienza en el entendido de que Enrique Kay en algún momento ya se está conectando con nosotros. Adelante, Mauricio.
Well, thank you, dear Victor. We haven't said that this is going to be in English, and Professor Block is going to speak in English. So we're starting right now. But first of all, Professor Block, you don't know how bad my results on the GRE exam were. So that's because I decided to go to Madrid and study with Professor Huerta Soto.
Oh, he's really great. I'm a big fan of his. They're doing a festschrift for him now, and I'm contributing to that. So you were in good hands. I guess I'm thinking of people mostly in the United States or who only speak English. Huerta Soto is a magnificent scholar and gentleman, and you were very well served by him. But I have another fee that I have to charge you, and that is you have to listen to my stupid jokes. So I have a stupid joke I have to share with you. And it's a joke about Spanish language and Hispanics. And whenever I tell people this, they think, well, maybe it'll be at the expense of Hispanic people. No. So anyway, here's the joke. In order to get a PhD at Columbia University, when I was there in 1972, when I got my PhD, you had to have 2 foreign languages. And I'm horrible at languages, but happily they allowed you to substitute math for one of the languages. So I passed the math test and I had to do 1 more language. Now I had 4 years of Spanish in high school and 3 years of Spanish in college, and I knew nothing. I'm very bad at languages, but they in the exam they allow you to take a Spanish-English dictionary, and you have all the time you want, and you translate from Spanish to English, and I passed. 2 guys from Mexico took the exam and they both failed. Why? Because they couldn't make a good English sentence to save themselves. So the joke is I used to tease them how much better my Spanish was than their Spanish. That's the joke.
We hope to have a better English accent, at least right now for this event. So we're going to start right now. So, dear friends, thank you very much. Thank you, Victor, México Libertario, of course, Professor Block, Lalo, for your invitation. It's a true honor to be here with you right now. It's an honor for me to present at this event with Professor Bloch, whose work I have been following for a long time now, because he has been very important in my training as a libertarian economist here in Bolivia, down in Bolivia. The reason that brings us here today is the celebration of the 45th anniversary of the great and famous book, Defending the Indefendible. It was published already in 1976 for the first time, and over the time it has been translated into more than 10 languages, speaking now of languages, training many and very important scholars in the defense of the cause of liberty. This book is so good that along with many other, like Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, or What is Seen and What is Not Seen by Frederick Bastiat, I recommend it to all those who want to start the adventure of knowing about good economics and defending private property individual rights. And this is because among many other things that with the passing of time, I realized that good economics has a lot of common sense, but it is not, strictly speaking, common sense. What seems obvious in the eyes of many people, the majority, it is not so obvious to an economist trained in the ideas of liberty. Defending the Indefendible does a great job defending different characters, professions, economic archetypes that are often vilified, criticized, and often penalized. For example, Defending the Indefendible deals with topics like the person who yells fire in a crowded theater, the drug addict, the prostitute, the pimp, the blackmailer, and so on, all under the NAP, the non-aggression principle. Professor Maury Rothbard said about it, it does far more to demonstrate with workability and morality of the free market than a dozen sober tomes on more respectable industries and activities. By testing and proving the extreme cases, he all the more illustrates and vindicates the theory. Professor Hayek said about this great book many years ago, looking through Defending the Indefendible made me feel that I was once more exposed to the shock therapy by which more than 50 years ago, the late Ludwig von Mises converted me to a consistent free market position. Even now, I am occasionally at first incredulous and feel that this is going too far, but usually find in the end that Walter is right. Some may find it too strong a medicine, but it will still do them good even if they hate it. A real understanding of economics demands that one disabuses oneself of many dear prejudices and illusions. Popular fallacies in economics frequently express themselves in unfounded prejudices against any other occupations, and in showing that falsity of these stereotypes, you are doing a real service, although you will not make yourself more popular with the majority. John Stossel said about it, Defending the Indefendible opened my eyes to the beauties of libertarianism. It explains that so much of what is assumed to be evil is not. The printed edition of Defending the Indefendible in Spanish, or under Defendiendo lo Indefendible, appeared first in 2012, the year 2012, sorry, thanks to Unión Editorial and Innisfree in Madrid, Spain, and of course, in Guatemala and in Buenos Aires, etc. And later, in 2013, Defending the Indefendible 2 was published, dealing with many more similar topics such as the smuggler, nuclear energy, topless in public, the homophobe, the intellectual property denier. And I think that due to the times of the pandemic that we live in today, there will be even more topics to be discussed in new editions of this great book. For example, I want to take the opportunity to ask Professor Block what he thinks of the use of tax havens or offshore jurisdictions or what are his thoughts on people who get COVID-19 who do not stay in strict lockdown and just go out to the streets, or the person who doesn't use face masks that were mandatory by the state. With all this said, again, especially for those who are just starting out in the doctrine of liberty, you will understand that especially in economic matters, it has a lot of common sense, but it is not strictly common sense. Economics and liberty must be approached responsibly with an adequate intellectual theoretical framework to interpret reality. And what a better job in doing this than Professor Block in writing not only Defending the Undefendable, but all of his great work through many, many years. Professor Block, thank you again for your work in Defending the Undefendable. Thank you for your work defending the cause of liberty. This is not a book to make many friends, but you have, without a doubt, at least one in Bolivia. Again, thank you very much for your work.
Well, thanks for the kind words. I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
Dear Enrique, do you want to add anything to what we are doing right now?
Okay. Thanks, Mauricio. Thanks, Edward. And hey, hello, Walter. Dr. Walter, it's a very honor to me to introduce you in our conference here in México Libertario. Well, my name is Enrique. I'm from Bolivia. I'm a political scientist, and I welcome you to the one more conference to Libertarian Mexico. This time we have the presence of Dr. Walter Block. We will introduce you to her famous book, Defending the Indefendible. He's an economist professor at Loyola University and a prominent author of great libertarian books. Dr. Block, welcome, and thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure to be with you guys.
Okay, Doctor, if you can introduce or share with you and the principal topics of your books, please, for our audience.
Okay, but first, before I mention that, I just wanted to say something about Hayek and Mises.
Of course.
I don't like to brag, but I once shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises, and I never washed my hand since. It's a little dirty, but if you shake my hand, you channel Mises. That's my connection with Mises. Well, I mean, I've read his stuff, and I'm a big fan of his as well, but I'm a lot older than you guys. I'm almost 80 years old. So when I was a kid, I met people that, almost like John Stuart Mill or David Hume, as far as you guys are concerned. They're way older than you and long deceased. With regard to Hayek, I once beat him in chess. Now, my way of beating people in chess is I say, look over there, and I grab their queen, and then I could beat them. It's interesting. Hayek, when I read what Hayek wrote about defending the undefendable, I thought he was drunk. I mean, he was comparing with me with Mises. I mean, that's ridiculous. You can't compare me with Mises. It's sort of like comparing me with Bach or Mozart, or that's crazy. And yet, I have written critical articles about the road to serfdom, and I felt that I was biting the hand that was feeding me. But then I felt that Hayek was a sort of a person, the way I am, and I emulate him in this, and that is we encourage criticisms from our students. Now, I never studied with Hayek formally, but I was a student of Hayek, and he was very nice to me, and I was nice to him on some occasions, but on other occasions, I criticized him. And I like to brag that I encourage my students to disagree with me. I don't insist that they agree with me. Okay, enough of Hayek and Mises. Well, I suppose I should also mention Murray Rothbard. He was also mentioned, and Murray, I had a relationship with him. I was friends with him. He was my mentor, my guru. Pretty much, I won't say everything I've ever written is just based on what he wrote. I've had a few ideas of my own, but an awful lot of what I write is based on what Murray Rothbard wrote. For example, blackmail. He wrote one sentence in Man, Economy, and State about blackmail. And then I started writing about it, and I wrote a lot about it. And I even have a book entirely devoted to just blackmail. So a lot of my work is standing on the shoulders of Mises, Hayek, and Rothbard, especially Rothbard. I have the closest kinship with him. I don't like to brag again. I keep saying I don't like to brag, and then I start bragging. But I won the Murray Rothbard Medal of Freedom, and Murray never won that. Ha. I mean, Murray can't win that because it's in his honor. So I won the Murray Rothbard Medal of Freedom from the Ludwig von Mises Institute, which I am a big fan of, and I'm the senior fellow there, as well as being a professor at Loyola. Okay, look, I'm a professor. I'm never supposed to answer any question directly. But now I'll try to answer Enrique's question, who said, what is the philosophy behind the defending the undefendable, the non-aggression principle, and private property rights based on homesteading is the principle. Namely, that's what libertarianism is all about, that you should not initiate violence against anyone or their property. So the non-aggression principle is one half of the coin of libertarianism. The other half is private property rights, because Enrique, I see, has a very nice shirt, and suppose I grab his shirt. Am I a criminal? Well, it all depends upon who's the rightful owner of that shirt. Now, I never saw that shirt before today, so he's the rightful owner. But if he stole it from me yesterday, I'm just repossessing it. And if he resists, he's the bad guy. So we need a theory of private property rights as well as the non-aggression principle in order to have libertarianism. And I think both of them are opposite sides of the libertarian coin. And for this, I go back to John Locke and Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe, who's done yeoman work on homesteading is the way to get to own private property. And this applies to parts of nature or animals or even to ourselves. We sort of homestead ourselves when we grow up, and when we're 2 or 3 years old, we start taking possession of ourselves. Before that, we're really, unaware when we're babies. So that's the theory of libertarianism. And what I wanted to do is to defend this theory and promote this theory. And as Murray said, it's all too easy to defend it and say, well, we should really privatize the post office or the sanitation garbage collection. Well, we should do that, and that's important too. But if all we do is that, then we're not doing as good a job as we could. We should apply it to everything. And one of the examples is blackmail. So let me just talk about, and I think you mentioned also yelling fire in a crowded theater. So I'll do those too, and then maybe we can discuss a few others. So what's going on with blackmail? Well, you have to distinguish blackmail from extortion. Blackmail and extortion are sometimes used as synonyms. They mean the same thing, but they mean something very different. But they have something in common. What do they have in common? In both cases, there's a threat and a demand for money or sexual services or something. But the difference is that in extortion, the threat is to violate the non-aggression principle. Namely, unless you give me money, I'll shoot you, or unless you give me money, I'll kidnap your children. Well, that's very bad, because libertarian theory is not only should you not do that, but you should not even threaten to do that. Because look, suppose I hold a gun on you and I say, give me your money or I'll shoot you. I didn't do any violence yet. And you give me the money because you're afraid I'll shoot you. I'm still a criminal, even though I didn't initiate any violence. So the proper way to put libertarianism is libertarianism is a theory of what just law should be. And what just law should be is you can do anything you damn well please, except do not initiate or threaten violence against anyone else or steal any of their property or molest them in any way. Well, so extortion is very bad, but blackmail is very different. Blackmail is the threat. It's also, there's a threat and a demand for money or something, but the threat is to gossip. I'm now going to threaten Mauricio that unless you give me money, Mauricio, I'm going to tell everyone that you take a bath with a rubber ducky. And when people hear that you take a bath with a rubber ducky, they're not going to be your friend. They'll fire you. Your girlfriend or your wife will leave you and you'll be in trouble. So I'm now threatening Mauricio that unless he gives me money, I'm going to tell everyone that he takes a bath with a rubber ducky. Well, my threat is just to gossip. I'm going to gossip about him. Do I have a right to gossip? Yeah, free speech. Now the paradox is that reputations would be safer if we got rid of blackmail laws, because people should be free to gossip. There's nothing wrong with gossiping, and if everyone gossiped, then we would lose the power to blackmail. In other words, Mauricio would say, well, I'll threaten to tell everyone that you cheated in cards, or you cheated when you beat Hayek in chess, or something like that. So I think blackmail should be legalized, because gossip is legal and should be legal. It's part of free speech, and we have to distinguish that from extortion. So I'm not defending extortion, I'm only defending blackmail. Not that I favor it, because remember what libertarian theory is should it be legal or not? Look, I'm against prostitution. I don't go to prostitutes. I have a wife, a daughter, a sister. I wouldn't want them to be prostitutes. But if they were, I wouldn't want them to go to jail for it. I wouldn't want them to be penalized for it. So when I defend all these people in defending the undefendable, it doesn't mean that I necessarily like what they're doing. I don't like blackmail. I don't think it's a good thing. But the only question that libertarianism asks is not whether you like something, whether it's good or bad, but rather, should it be legal? And everything should be legal unless it violates the non-aggression principle. And blackmail does not violate the non-aggression principle, therefore it should be legal. Okay, let me now try yelling fire in a crowded theater. Now, the reason I got onto this is that Justice Holmes, a Supreme Court judge in the United States, once said, well, look, we favor free speech, but free speech is not absolute. You can't do anything. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. By the way, I also agree that free speech is not absolute, because there is certain speech acts that should be illegal, namely a threat. Namely, if I threaten Enrique that unless he gives me his shirt, I'll shoot him, that's just speech, and that should be prohibited. So I'm not a free speech absolutist. There are certain speech acts that are prohibited by law. But what Justice Holmes was saying is, well, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, therefore you can't gossip, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was sort of the entering wedge, what is it, the devil gets his hoof under the tent or something like that. So I asked myself, well, is there any case where it would be okay to yell fire in a crowded theater? Can I concoct some case? And I came up with sadomasochism. What's sadomasochism? Sadomasochism is people enjoy beating each other up. My SM joke, sadomasochistic joke, is that the masochist says to the sadist, beat me. And the sadist says, no. You get it? If you have to explain the joke, you're in trouble. So I came up with the idea of a sadomasochistic theater, only instead of beating each other up, they make a fire and then they all run around in the fire. Should that be legal? Well, not in the ordinary theater. In the ordinary theater, you buy a ticket and either it says on the ticket, shut up and watch the movie, or behave yourself or something like that, or it's implicit that you're supposed to sit there. You can laugh when there's a joke on the movie, and you can cry if it's a sad movie, but you just can't interrupt the other people watching the movie. Well, this would interrupt that. But if you had a clear title of the theater, the sadomasochistic theater, and that yelling fire is welcomed here, well, then it's okay to do it. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with yelling fire in a crowded theater. It all depends upon property rights. And property rights are a way to solve all sorts of problems. For example, should children in school be made to say the Pledge of Allegiance, or should they all have school uniforms or something like that? Well, the answer is let's privatize all education, and then some schools will be this way and some schools will be that way, and you don't have to make one rule for everybody. So some theaters are ordinary theaters that most people go to, and other theaters are sadomasochistic theaters. And that, I mean, private property rights is a way to solve all sorts of challenges to libertarianism, among which are some of these. So the reason I wrote that chapter was to defend free speech. And my fear was that they would keep reducing it. You know, you can't libel people, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I'm saying, well, there is a case where you could have yelling fire in a crowded theater and it would be entirely legal.
Thank you very much for your fantastic exposition. Today we're having a great time with Dr. Walter Block, speaking about their famous and polemic book, Defending the Indefendible. Now I want to introduce you, Edward Escalante. Edward, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Edward, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for the invitation, and of course it's a pleasure here to share this opportunity with Dr. Block. I still remember in 2019 I had a chance to do a presentation, a talk in the Loyola University, and I was able to see how many of the students of Professor Block share a fascination and an admiration for Professor Block. I think this book, his consistent teaching for many years is something very valuable in the profession right now. And I can see that he's a committed professor. What is, I think, most important when we talk about scholarly work is this capacity to challenge students' minds. And I think that's what Professor Block does in his university. So shortly after that, I got my PhD, and right now I'm currently teaching at Angelo State University. I teach economics there in Texas. So in the same tradition of Professor Block, I also invite many students to come with us. And of course, we don't have Professor Block with us, but we have the same spirit and the same intention to challenge students' minds in our program. Well, having said that, I was, a little surprised when I read the book on how much I agree with Professor Block in what he said. What I had in mind was that probably I was going to find many points and examples and claims where I could disagree with what he said, but that was not entirely the case. There is a warning at the beginning of the book that says that most of the arguments are based in this non-aggression principle. But what I find most compelling through the book, I think, is the economic reasoning and some moral arguments. I think the economic reasoning is very powerful in this book. I think it's important to point out that this book may be also helpful as an introduction to economics, because it does a great job at putting right there to explain provocative cases, the role of institutions such as the profit and loss, the role of prices, and the role of property. So when you put those together, those institutions, the economic analysis is very strong. And the logic of that analysis is so clear that I think it's compelling to the reader to try to understand what is something that I think economists like to do, which is that we have a bias against bias, right? So we like to choose those cases that are very challenging and show the people that, this may go against the intuition, but here you have the economic logic, and with this logic, actually, we can put something to the table. And I think that's what Professor Block is doing in this book, in each case. What I try to do, if I want to push myself a little bit more, is in what cases I may, first I'm curious if Professor Block actually has changed his mind on what he wrote in this book. I mean, there are some claims there that probably needed a little bit more attention considering recent events. Mauricio mentioned briefly some of those when it put on the table some examples of the current pandemic. Many of the problems and the cases that Professor Bloch describes in his book do not seem to put so much attention on the problem of externalities, right? When we actually, right now, when we see something like a vaccine, for example, some people do not want to get a vaccine, and they may say, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody by not having the vaccines, or this is my property, and my property starts with my body, so I'm the last person to take a decision on this. But we know that it creates an externality, because not having a vaccine presents some social cost on someone else. So how is it that we can solve then those situations where we have some externalities? We may choose, of course, unfortunately, I would say, for most of what we have been living, we have confronted the government solution. But why is it that we were not able probably to provide more examples of what would be the private solutions to externalities, right? So I would like to hear Professor Bloch on that opinion also. In some part of the book, I think it's also in the beginning, he mentioned the close connection of libertarianism with Western civilization. Now, this made me think if actually Professor Bloch believes that some other cultures do not have a connection with liberty. There are no roots for liberty in some other cultures than the Western civilization. This, for me, seems to be a little problematic, because when I like economics more than libertarianism in the sense, because economics is universal, and economics provides an explanation for everything that happens in the world, wherever you are, and whatever the culture you come from. So I also would like to put that on the table to discuss with Professor Bloch. Another important aspect on this book was in the case of the difference with salaries, with women, for example. Professor Bloch makes a good point, and he says, well, for many reasons, women may be less productive than men, and that's actually what explains that they may receive less salaries or less money when for the same jobs. He mentioned that the importance of this discussion is that that's a factual claim. It is actually true in many cases that that's the case. But he doesn't put a lot of discussion on why is it that the case. Yes, we know that probably is it that women earn lower salaries than men because of their own decisions or because of their own circumstances. But I believe also that the current institutional problem that we have should pay attention to the reasons why is it then that women are less productive than men in the job market, and maybe what is the answer that economists should provide to this problem, which seems to be a more institutional problem, right? Why is it then that women end up in this way? They shouldn't end up in this way, but they do. And once they do, of course, if you try to force equal salary by law and by force, maybe the consequences are even worse than the problem that we're trying to solve. But then what is the solution? How is it that we can improve this? And those are probably something that probably Professor Bloch will have to write another book to try to deal with these institutional problems. Maybe he will be able to do that and let us discuss that. But those are the kind of questions that are there that I would like to hear Professor Bloch's opinion. Overall, I think the book it's great. I think it does that what every economist should aspire to do, challenge students' minds, use provocative cases, use the logic of economics to enlighten a specific and controversial case. And I think that's what Professor Bloch has been doing with this book and with his career. What is, I think, wonderful about Professor Bloch and his role as a professor and as a scholar is that I don't think any student that takes his class is the same after taking his class, right? It may be probably go into different directions, but it's not the same person. And I think every student in a university should try to take those classes, right? I cannot be the same person after this class. So that's what I would like to say at this moment for this book. It was a pleasure reading it. It didn't take me such a long time to read it. It was very fast. But I appreciate it very much. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lalo, for three very important issues raising. One is externalities and COVID and vaccines. Another is economics versus liberty. Economics pervades everything and maybe libertarianism doesn't. And the third one is the wage gap between men and women. So let me take them in that order. First of all, there are two types of externalities. Positive externalities and negative externalities, external economies and external diseconomies, sometimes called. So what's an example of a positive externality? And I'll get to the negative ones later. The usual positive externality example is education. In other words, we have private reasons for becoming educated. We'll get a better mate, we'll have a higher salary, we'll have a better life. But there are also spillover effects, because if I'm educated, I'll be less likely to be a criminal, I'll be a better voter, and therefore I'm not going to take that into account because I'm selfish and I'm only interested in number one, namely me. I'm only interested in my salary. So we don't have enough resources, enough investment in education, and therefore the government has to do a little bit more. That would be the external economy argument for market failure. And externalities are just one of many market failures that critics of free enterprise offer. Another one would be public goods. Another one would be monopoly. And then we have to have antitrust laws. Those are the big three, but there are many, many others. Well, I reject, as an Austrian economist, I reject all market failure. No such thing as a market failure. It's all mistaken. So what's the criticism of positive externalities? The criticism of positive externalities is we have no evidence that people value that there's any positive spillover. Let's say there's an old person with no grandchildren and he's forced to pay for other people's education on the grounds that it'll benefit him. Well, look, right now I'm going to smile at you. See, I'm smiling. Now I'm going to charge you because I benefited you. Give me money because I smiled at you. Or, you know, I take a shower once a month, whether I need it or not. So I'm very clean and I'm going to charge you for soap. Well, this is highly problematic because not only on a libertarian point of view, you can't, the only way you can charge people is if they agree to pay. So I bought this shirt, I agreed to pay for it, but I didn't agree when you smiled that I should pay you, or when you washed yourself that I should pay for yourself. I didn't agree with that. And if you force me to pay for that, you're stealing from me. So that's the libertarian point of view. From the economic point of view, Hayek was very strong on subjectivism. Austrians believe in the subjectivism. How do I know that I benefit? What's the proof that I benefit from you? Maybe I like dirt. Maybe if you don't take a shower, I like it better. Maybe if you don't smile, I like it better. Where's the proof? Where's the proof that that I'll benefit you? The only way you can demonstrate benefit is if somebody is willing to pay for it. I paid for the shirt. We demonstrated that I valued the shirt more than the $10 it cost me, but there's no way to prove that I benefit from you being more educated. So I reject the positive externalities argument on the basis of libertarianism and economics. Now let's take the negative externality. The usual one there is smoke pollution. I have a steel mill, or a copper mill, and I pay for the steel, and I pay for the iron and the coal, and I pay the labor salary, and those are all private costs, and that's fine. But then I impose external costs on you because now you get smoke in your lungs, and you hang out your laundry on a wash line, and you hang it out and it's wet and clean, and you come back and it's dry and dirty with my smoke, and I'm imposing costs on you, and therefore this is an external diseconomy. And I say, this is nonsense. This is not an external diseconomy. This is not a market failure. This is trespass. If I take my garbage, eggshells, orange peels, coffee grinds, and I dump it on your front lawn, we know what that is. That's trespass. And now what I do is I first burn it up into little smoke particles, and now I dump it on your lawn. It's the same thing. It's not a market failure. It's government failure to uphold private property rights. So I reject the externalities argument, positive and negative. I don't think there's any market failure, and certainly the externalities is not. Now let's discuss COVID and vaccines and stuff like that. I wrote an article in the Journal of Libertarian Studies not too long ago, a few months ago, and what I said is there are hawks and there are doves. The hawks say, you got to wear a mask, you got to be vaccinated, you got to stay 6 feet away or we're going to put you in jail or something like that. The doves say, you know, this is nonsense. Leave everyone alone. My answer to that is I'm agnostic because I believe in specialization and division of labor. And this really turns on what are the effects of COVID. And we don't know what the effects of COVID are. Certainly we didn't know when I wrote this. I wrote this maybe a year ago when COVID was new, right? You know, it really depends upon the facts. And we don't know the facts. Look, there was this woman named Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary was an innocent person. She had no mens rea, no guilty conscience. She was working in a restaurant and giving typhoid to other people. Well, that we knew about. And the answer is, well, you don't arrest her. You don't put her in jail because she's not a criminal. She didn't have any guilty intent, no mens rea. It was just a tort rather than a crime. But we have to isolate her. So if we know for sure that that's what COVID is like, well, then we have to isolate. But then other people say, well, it only affects elderly people who have other diseases like cancer or obesity or something like that. So we just don't know the facts. So what I'm saying, what my article said was, we libertarians have to be a little bit more modest. We have to realize there's specialization in division of labor, and qua libertarian, we have no insight into parasitology or biology or pharmaceutical things like that. So my answer then was, we have to maintain a dignified silence on that because we don't know the facts. But if we stipulate the facts, if we stipulate that COVID is like typhoid, well, then it would be justified to compel people to be vaccinated. Not because it's an externality, but because it's a criminal act. Look, if I take a gun and I start shooting at random bullets, and sometimes I hit people, sometimes I don't hit people, what do we say about me? We say that I'm a maniac, I'm a criminal. But if COVID is like that, then if I go out and I exhale and 20 miles away, Victor gets COVID and he dies from it, well, I got to be stopped. So, but again, it's not an externality, it's trespass. It's only instead of shooting lead bullets with a gun, I'm shooting disease germs or whatever it is, viruses to other people. So that would be my answer to that. There's no market failure, and externalities is not a market failure. That's just a criticism of the mainstream economists against good economics. The second one that Lalo mentioned was economics is universal, and libertarian is not so universal. Well, I agree with them on the economics. Economics is universal. It applies to whatever your culture is. I don't care. But I think libertarianism is also universal, namely it's unjust to do anything. I don't care what your culture is. Now look, in India, they had this thing called sati, S-U-T-T-E-E, sati. What this is when a husband dies, they burn him in a funeral pyre and they push the wife onto the funeral pyre. They kill the wife. Well, England came in to India and they said, well, you know, this is wrong. And anyone does that, we're going to shoot him. Well, look, I'm not a big fan of colonialism, but on this one issue, I think the British were right. That even though the culture of India had sati was justified, it's not justified. Libertarianism applies to every culture, and if we find there are Martians, it'll apply to the Martians as well. Namely, it's wrong to initiate violence against innocent people. And sati is an initiation of violence against innocent people. Now, look, if the woman wants to burn herself, fine. But to push her onto the funeral pyre is wrong. So I agree with half of what Lalo said. He said that economics is universal. Yes. But libertarianism is also universal in the sense that it is unjust. I don't care what your culture is. If you have part of your culture where you can initiate violence against innocent people, take in some cultures, there is no such thing as marital rape. Namely, if a husband forces himself on his wife, it's not rape because they're married. Well, I mean, if the woman agreed to that contract, a little sadomasochism here, fine. But other than that, that's rape if you force yourself onto your wife. I don't care what the culture is. So I think libertarianism is also universal. Now, the third one is the wage gap. And here I disagree a little bit with Lalo. He says this is a problem. This is no problem. This is just the fact that this is an illustration of the law. What's the law? Comparative advantage. I'm not even sure which law it is. I'll think about that and I'll come up with it. Look, what the situation is. It's the law of alternative or opportunity costs. That's what this is an illustration of. Whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else as well or at all. And the usual way I illustrate this is with Yo-Yo Ma and Usain Bolt. Yo-Yo Ma is one of the best cellists in the world. What's his time in the 100? Not too good. I don't know what his time is in the 100, but I'll bet you it's something like 15 or 20 seconds. Whereas Usain Bolt, they really ought to give him a speeding ticket. I mean, he does the 100 meters in 9.3 or something, which, you know, is just ridiculous. How good can he play the cello? I don't think he can play the cello at all. And if he can play it, he's probably a lousy cello player. Why? Because he spends all his time lifting weights or running or doing things that top athletes do. And the reason Yo-Yo Ma is not a good sprinter is because he plays the cello all day and he doesn't do the things that the sprinters have to do. Well, it's the same thing with men and women. Men do very little of the housework. Women, wives, do most of the housework, the cooking, the cleaning, the shopping, the childcare, certainly the breastfeeding, obviously breastfeeding. Women do, I don't know, 90% of the housework. The joke is the husband and the wife, they both have a PhD in chemistry. They both work all day in the laboratory. And what does the husband say to the wife when they come home? What's for dinner, dear? Namely, even when they're equally productive, the wife is cooking the dinner and not the husband. And when there are children, you know, the women are much more into children than men are. I remember when my first child was born, my wife had sharp elbows, you know, keeping me away if I'd hurt the child or something. Women are weird with children. They're really into children in a way that men just aren't, on average. There are always exceptions, but on average. There are studies of sociologists, you know, what is the proportion of housework? Is it equal? It doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be 45-55. That's roughly equal. Or does the man do most of it, or does the woman do most of it? In all these surveys, the women does the lion's share of the housework. Now, there are two proofs, or two bits of evidence that show this thing. It's called the marital asymmetry hypothesis. Marital asymmetry, when you get married, you have an asymmetry in terms of housework, cooking, cleaning. And the point is, when you're doing housework, cooking, cleaning, childcare, whatever, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else as well. What else? Well, working in the market is one other thing that they're just not as good at. Because they're spending so much time on this. If you spend a lot of time on the cello, you're not going to be a good marathon runner. If you were a good marathon runner, you're probably not a good cellist. So it's the same thing with men and women. What are the two proofs? The first proof is the wage gap between all men and all women is something like, 25%, 30%. It's a pretty big gap. But the wage gap, but now what you do is you bifurcate the sample. And what you do is you take, well, what's the wage gap between ever married men and women? Ever married means married, widowed, divorced, separated, whatever. The wage gap isn't 25%. The wage gap is like 70%. And then you say, well, what's the wage gap between never married men and women? Never married means not widowed, not divorced, not separated, not nothing. There is no wage gap. Okay, well, you know, you never get 1.0, but you'll get 0.9, you'll get 1.1. There's virtually no wage gap. The expected value of the wage gap is 0. So the difference between the two is almost entirely due to marriage. Well, marriage is a nice institution. People voluntarily enter it. So there's no problem to be addressed. We don't have to solve any problem. And Lalo was perfectly correct when he said, well, if we artificially raise women's wages to be equal to men's, namely raise it by 25%, well, it's like the minimum wage law. You're going to have unemployment for women. The second proof of this is, look, suppose I'm an employer and I have a man in front of me and a woman in front of me, and they both have a productivity of $10 an hour. Now, according to the gap thing, the woman is going to be paid $7 and the man is going to be paid $10. Well, if I hire a woman, I'll make $3 profit off of her. If I hire the man, I'll make no profit off of him. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to hire the woman. And then somebody else is, right now she's making $7 an hour. Somebody's going to say, well, I'll pay you $7.01. Someone's going to say, I'll pay you $7.02. The wage will rise to equal productivity. We have a theory in economics. It's called discounted marginal revenue product equals wages, or something like wages equal productivity. The reason LeBron James, a great basketball player, makes a lot of money is because his productivity is very high. The reason Lalo and I make a moderate middle-class salaries, we're both professors, is because our productivity is in the middle. The reason somebody who pushes a broom or asks if you want fries with that at McDonald's makes a low salary is because his productivity is low. So the reason women make less money than men is because their productivity is lower. Now, look, a century ago, we know that a lot of jobs took upper body strength, and men are stronger than women. The way we cut down trees is with a saw. The way we dig a hole for a building or a pipeline is with a pick and shovel. Men were stronger than women then, and that's why men had a higher wage than women. But nowadays, women can run a steam shovel or do any physical activity, because most of it is with machines, and women can press a button or drive a tractor or whatever. So why do we still have the gap? Because of the unequal division of male and female to the family. So I don't think there's any problem. I don't think the government has to step in and fix this. This is just a part and parcel of opportunity costs, alternative costs. Whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of something else. Right now, we're now talking. We could have been sleeping, eating, riding a bicycle, swimming, right? But we can't do that because we're now talking to each other. Well, that's just another illustration of opportunity costs or alternative costs. And this is why women make less money than men on average. But if you've never been married, not widowed, not divorced, not separated, nothing, there's no gap. So that's a very powerful argument. And it's just a hypothesis. It's not an apodictic. It's not praxeology, but it's a very strong hypothesis. And when I teach this, I offer this as a hypothesis. And the other hypothesis is that most men are, CEOs or bosses, and they hate women. I tell you, most heterosexual men that I know don't hate women. If they're going to discriminate against anyone, they're not going to discriminate against women. They're going to discriminate against competitive men. But that's the theory, that the men somehow hate women and want to keep them down. I don't think too much of that theory. So I hope I've done justice to the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Lalo, and thank you very much, Dr. Walter Block, for your contributions and your passion to share with us the ideas of liberty, the ideas of libertarian topics. And now we are finishing our conversation. And for the end, I will invite Mauricio to share a few final conclusion with us and with our young Latin libertarian public in Facebook. Please, Mauricio.
Yeah, sure, of course. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say that when we are talking about libertarianism here, we're talking about libertarianism in the principle of the non-aggression principle. We're not talking about the principles of Milton Friedman or Ayn Rand or even Professor Hayek. We are talking about the non-aggression principle in the lines of Professor Murray Rothbard, right? So I believe that's why when we are discussing about if libertarianism is universal or not, I believe the non-aggression principle is universal in this sense. So I just wanted to say that, and just wanted to ask, because maybe Professor Walter Block is not doesn't know that we libertarians here in Latin America are fighting each other all the time on one big topic, one very hard topic, that is abortion. And Walter Block, I believe, has a very good theory to explain what eviction is, or evictionism, just to separate things and to keep libertarianism here in Latin America more between friends and not to fight each other all the time. Maybe Professor Block wanted to explain a bit more, or at least briefly, what eviction is in the case of abortion, please.
Sometimes I'm asked to advise people in the Canadian Libertarian Party or in the US Libertarian Party when they're asked, what about abortion? What's the libertarian view on abortion? You know what my advice is? My advice is that the general public disagrees on abortion, and libertarians disagree on abortion, and therefore the Libertarian Party has no position on this. If you want to hear my position, I'll tell it to you later afterward, but right now I'm speaking in behalf of the Libertarian Party, and in behalf of the Libertarian Party, I just have to say we have no view on that because we're divided. However, I have what I think is the solution to the problem. Now, here we have two libertarians, Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul, who are leading libertarians. I don't think anyone would disagree that those two are leading libertarians, and yet they're 180 degrees apart from each other on this issue. Murray Rothbard is pro-life, pro-choice. Ron Paul is pro-life. You can't get too further apart than Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul, right? I think the proper solution to that is a thing called evictionism. You see, what the pro-choice people say is that the woman has the, I should start in a different way. When does human life start? Human life starts with the fertilized egg. It doesn't start when the baby is born, and it doesn't start when the heartbeat is. Oh, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, I'm Jewish, so I know the Jewish tradition. You know when the baby is viable? When it graduates from medical school? I'm kidding. That was just a joke. You don't have to wait till you graduate from medical school to be a human being. Look, the baby 1 hour before birth is the same baby as the baby 1 hour after birth. Look, we've been at it for about an hour. We're about the same people as we were an hour ago, right? Well, the baby in the womb, and now the baby comes out of the womb, it's the same baby. So it's crazy to say, well, when it comes out of the womb, it's a human being. And when it's in the womb, it's not a human being 10 minutes before coming out. So you go back and look, the sperm alone will not create a human being. The egg alone will not create a human being. But the fertilized egg will be a human being. So I say the human being starts with the fertilized egg. That's when then life starts. Okay. So how, I have to tell you that evictionism is a principled compromise between pro-life and pro-choice. So what is compromise? An unprincipled compromise, I say 2 + 2 is 6. You say 2 + 2 is 4. So the compromise is 2 + 2 is 5. Well, that's a compromise, mathematical compromise, but it's not a principled compromise because you can't deduce 2 + 2 = 5 from anything except that you want to compromise. So I am offering evictionism not just as a compromise, but as a principled compromise. Okay, so the pro-life people say you cannot evict and you can't kill the fetus. What does evict mean? Just take the fetus out of your body. That's just eviction. And killing, we all know what killing is. And the pro-life people say you cannot do either. The pro-choice people say you can do both. Yes, you can evict the fetus if you want at any time. And you can also kill the fetus because the fetus is not a person. It's just like a blob of protoplasm or something like that. So the eviction compromise is we give each one half a loaf. You can evict, but you can't kill. Now, it's true that if you evict the child in the first 6 months, you're going to kill the child because today's medical technology is such that if you evict, you'll kill. But in the last trimester, you can evict and the baby will be viable. So if we adopt evictionism, we save 1/3 of all babies. If that's the law, if evictionism is the law, then 1/3 of all babies are now safe, whereas before they were not safe. Okay, so why is this a principled compromise? The reason it's a principled compromise, we go back to, you'll never guess what, private property rights. Who owns the womb? Who owns the woman's body? I'll give you one hint. The woman, she owns it. So what do we say about the unwanted fetus? We say the unwanted fetus is a trespasser. Now, take the case of rape. Rape is a woman's walking down the street, she gets grabbed, she gets impregnated, and now there's a person, a human being growing inside of her. Is that person a trespasser? Yes, that person is a trespasser because she owns that body and there's some person inside of her. Now, it's true the baby is innocent, no mens rea, the baby is totally innocent, but the baby is still a trespasser. A 13-year-old girl is now pregnant because she was raped. And she has no right to evict this person inside of her. Look, I invite you to my house for dinner. And around 10 o'clock, I start hinting, I got to get up early tomorrow morning and, please leave. And you say, well, I'm staying here for 9 months. I say, what? You can't stay here for 9 months. It's my house. Get out. So the woman has a right to evict the baby, but not to kill the baby as the baby is innocent. Now, you might say, well, very, very few abortions occur from rape. What about voluntary sexual intercourse? Didn't the woman invite the baby in? And if you invite, if I invite you into my plane and then we're at 30,000 feet and I say, please leave, well, that's not kosher. That's very bad. So did the woman who had voluntary sexual intercourse invite the baby? Well, if there's going to be an invitation, there has to be an inviter and an invitee, right? You can't invite nothing. You have to have somebody, some person that you're going to invite. Time of sexual intercourse, was there a baby? No. Because remember, we said the baby doesn't start until it's a fertilized egg. Sexual intercourse occurs and it takes a while for the sperm to get up some tube or other, fallopian tube, I don't know. And now the baby starts in about an hour. But at the time of sexual intercourse, there was no baby to invite. So if she changes her mind, or if there's a problem with the birth control or something like that, she can still evict. Now, look, in my heart of hearts, I'm really pro-life. Some of my best friends are human beings. I like people. I don't want human beings killed. But I note that right now, only in the last 3 months will evictionism save babies. But medical technology will improve. Maybe in 10 years, instead of the last 3 months, it'll be the last 4 months that you can't, that eviction will allow the baby to be alive. You know that in 10,000 years from now, if we don't blow ourselves up before then, baby will be viable. The fertilized egg will be viable in a test tube, right? Because it'll be 10,000 years of technology. So if we pro-lifers stick to our erroneous view of pro-life, because remember, they say no eviction, well, we're never going to win. Whereas if we adopt evictionism, fellow pro-lifers, eventually we'll win. Medical technology will save us. So that's the 5-minute version of evictionism, and that would be my solution. But when you're talking to other people, this might not be the first issue that you want to raise because people are, feel very strongly about this, and you don't want to lose converts because they're either pro-life or pro-choice, and you're not. So one way is evictionism. The other way is to just say, well, look, we libertarians are divided on this and we, just like everyone else is divided. But for the intra-libertarian debates that you guys are talking about, and not just in Central and South America, but every libertarian, I think evictionism is the only correct view. And by the way, I'm coming out with not one, but 2 books on this subject. And what I do in the first half of the book is I give the theory. And in the second half of the book, I criticize everyone who doesn't agree with evictionism. Namely, I criticize every pro-life and every pro-choice person. I criticize Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul and Ayn Rand and everybody because they're all wrong. The only correct libertarian position based on private property rights and non-aggression is evictionism.
Great, thank you. Great topic. Looking forward to
guys.
Now remember my price. My price for doing this is that if you're thinking of going to college, you have to think of applying to Loyola. You don't have to apply to Loyola, but you have to think about it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you guys for your time and your fantastic exposition in this evening. And thanks to México Libertario and Innisfree Editorial for this space to discuss the ideas of liberty. I'm sure that all our public enjoyed this hour with the legend Dr. Walter Block. The resulting video will be subtitled in Spanish to all the Latin public and will be posted in the YouTube channel of México Libertario in the last week. So I guess that's all. We finished our conference. So thank you very much, Dr. Walter Block. Thank you very much, Mauricio, and thank you very much, Lalo, for this fantastic time with México Libertario and Innisfree Editorial.
Thanks for having me. I feel I made 4 new friends.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sure.
Kind
Thank you. It was a pleasure.